Hello, this is a tutorial for those who are trying to use Docker to install a container for mTree. So what we're going to do here is we assume that you've gotten Docker running. So if you're running on Windows, which we'll use here, you should have Docker dashboard, which should look something like this. If you go into containers and images, you should see nothing. So that's where you're going to start. Again, if you have issues with the installation of Docker, talk to the mentors or post a message in the appropriate channel, and we can provide additional support. But the idea is that from a fresh Docker install, we should be able to install an mTree container. And the reason that we do that, in case you're curious for the technical issues, is just because if we all run it in a Docker container, then if you run into any issues, we should be able to replicate them anywhere. So it allows us to sort of get away from like a peculiarity of your operating system or your computer configuration. So that's the reason. Docker's been around for 6 or 7 years, so it's pretty stable. We've used it a good bit. It's worth the time and effort. So how we're going to start is we have to get what's called a Docker image. So a Docker image is everything that you need to run that kind of like mini computer inside your own computer. Again, if you want, there are additional videos on YouTube, for example, that explains kind of how the Docker technology works. Needless to say, it's basically you run an entire computer inside your own system. It's not virtualized. It's running through a particular subsystem. Anywho, so how it starts is we're going to go to hub.docker.com. So just in any browser that you've got, just go there. You don't have to log in or anything. And then in the search box up at the top, type in mTree and then hit enter. And then you'll get some search results. And the first one is mTree/mTree. That's the one we're interested in, a container for running mTree economic simulations. So we'll click on that. And so what you'll notice is, this is mTree. You can do this Docker pull command over here, which we're actually going to do something like that in a second. But the key thing with a lot of these is that, we're going to have different versions of mTree out. For example, as we run into potential bugs or anything like that, we might have updates. And so what we're going to do in order to make it easy is we're going to have, slight version number changes just to be able to identify like, oh, the reason why it doesn't work on your computer is you're still running a slightly older version. So anyway, so we'll have different version numbers, so it'll be important. So we're going to flip over to this tags area of the screen, and you're going to notice there's two tags. There's one, it's mTree 1.0.1, and that's what we just have updated recently. And then there's also 0.9, which was from a while ago. So we're going to take the mTree 1.0.1. So it's the major number, the 1.0.1, right? So it's the major release is 1. I think the minor release is 0. And then kind of the maintenance number is 0.1. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to copy this command. And then what you're going to do is you're going to go to PowerShell, or if you're on a Mac, you'll go into Terminal. Whatever terminal or application like that, that's what you'll use. And then since we've copied it, we should be able to, if I do this right, and I've not done it right yet, the wonders of Windows computers. Okay, maybe I didn't copy it. Let's see. Okay, it should be copied. There we go. Okay, so now what you'll start to see momentarily is it's downloading what are called layers. And so these layers are different aspects of an operating system installation. And the idea with Docker is it installs all these in layers, theoretically making it easier to kind of reuse parts. So the underlying system we're using, the operating system that mTree runs on in these containers, or these images, depending on how you want to talk about it, is Ubuntu. And then we just layer on, for example, Python and so on and so forth. And then we put on mTree as well. So what's going to happen momentarily is that we'll start to see all these extracting things. And so if you do this a lot, this is just a tip. If you pull a lot of images and images down, and then run containers, if you're not careful, it can eat space up on your system. So if you find yourself running out of hard drive space, which is unusual, but I have seen it happen on smaller laptops, it's possible that you just have a bunch of like kind of dead images and containers hanging around, and you'll want to go and search, Google or whatnot, and just say delete unused Docker containers. And it's pretty straightforward. It's a single command. Okay, so now we've actually got the Docker image down, and so now what we can actually do is we can flip over to the Docker dashboard. And so now what you'll notice is, whereas before we didn't have anything in containers and images, now we have one in images, right? And that's the mTree tag 1.0.1, right? So on and so forth. And so if we want to run this, it's actually pretty straightforward. We just hit run, and now we need to pause. So we have these optional settings. And so we're going to fill these out. So you can call the container name whatever you want. If you don't call it anything, Docker will just make up kind of an odd name for you, which can be nice, but it's also can be fairly confusing. So we'll just call it mTree container. Lack of creativity there. And then for the localhost port, that's actually important. You're going to want to specify that as port 5000. The container path, you're just going to want to put it's on the right, not the host path, the container path, /auctions. And then finally, the host path, you'll just find a directory that you have, that contains mTree, microeconomic systems. So in this case, I'm going to use an older set of examples, mTree auction examples. It might work, might not, but it'll at least kind of show you what's going on. So what happens here is we're just specifying the container name. That's just for us to be able to see it better when we look in the containers apps. The ports, this is going to become more useful later on when we start using the web interface for mTree to manage that. It's port 5000. Basically, it maps this port on your system to port 5000 inside the container. That's more technical detail than you might need, but that's what's happening. And then finally, on the volumes path, what's actually happening is Docker's, when you run a container, normally the hard drive in it just sort of deletes itself or just sort of dies whenever you turn it off. So it's considered ephemeral storage. And so what you can do here is you can actually have it so that the Docker container, that computer that's running inside your computer, can kind of point to a directory on your system, so you can kind of persist data. This is especially useful for development, right? Because then you can run a Docker container while you're developing your MES code, run it, see what happens, and it'll also put the logs out into your your normal kind of hard drive space. So that's what's going on there. And then once you've set it up, all you have to do is hit run, and then it'll take a moment. There's whatever, Docker, doesn't matter. It's just a warning. So that happens. And so then when you go to containers now, you'll have this kind of entry here, mTree container. It'll tell you the version number and all that, the tag number. And so we'll just play around with it here for a second. So if you ever need to delete it, obviously hit the delete button. If you want to restart it, there's a restart button. And this should be the same for both Mac and Windows. Stop, that'll do it, and we'll actually hit that in a second. CLI stands for command line interface. We'll actually use that momentarily just to kind of illustrate some things. And then open in browser. We'll talk about that more when we get more specific to the web interface. So I'm going to stop the Docker container. So one of the things you might want to be mindful of, especially if you have a laptop, when Docker is running, it can take up, it can take up some of the power. So if you're running stuff and want to make sure your battery lasts longer, and you want to be able to watch a lot of cat videos on YouTube, for example, you might want to shut down the Docker container when you're not using it. That's all you have to do is hit stop. And so then when you come back into Docker dashboard, you'll see this entry, and then all you have to do is just hit start, and then it'll come up, pretty quickly. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to hit the command line interface. And so this is going to give you kind of an overview of the mTree runner. So the mTree runner is the command line interface that we use to control experiments, especially in the large-scale simulation cases. I will warn you, there are occasionally some weird error messages that come up inside this. Don't worry about those. Don't try to. Those aren't the important errors generally. They're just some issues that we haven't cleared out from our backlog of issues. So just be mindful of that. So what's going to happen is what you're seeing now is this is actually a Unix command prompt. So you don't need to know Unix here to be an expert. So it's similar to Windows, of course. Instead of, like, for example, if you're used to command prompt in Windows, right, you would type in dir. In Unix, you type in ls. And so what this is, this is actually giving you the list of files in what the Docker container thinks is this /auctions folder, but really it links to your whatever directory that you have these auction examples available. Okay, so then what we're going to do now is we're going to go into the, let's see, the Tentomont example. That might, I haven't run this in this version yet. And so what we're going to do now is, so we just do cd and then the name of the MES we want to run. So for example, if you're running the learning exercises, you would go, cd basic auctions, and then you would type in the step number. So it'd be cd, it would be like cd basic auctions /step 6, and you can do that, or you can just do it in 2 steps and do cd basic auctions and then cd basic auctions, hit enter, then cd step _6, and then you'll be in that. Okay, so now if we do an ls, it'll show us the files in the directory, and we'll notice there's a couple old log files. There's an MES folder and there's a config folder. So if we do ls config, it'll tell us the files that are in there. So we have this basic simulation.json. Okay, so that's kind of nice. So we should be able to run something here. And so what I'm going to type in here is mTree, and then you can actually hit tab and it'll try to complete it for you. So we want to have mTree _runner, then we're going to do space -i, which is just, we're going to pass in a config file. And then do ./config, and this will be the same. It looks complicated perhaps, but it's the same for pretty much all of them. And then the name of the configuration you want to run. So in this case, basic simulation. So normally, like for example, again in the mTree learning exercises, it would be mTree runner -i. Once you're inside that, like step 6, step 5, whatever folder -i, ./config, whatever the file name is, and the // all that says is the dot means the current directory you're in, the / means I'm looking for a directory underneath it, and in this case it's config, and then the next, so anyway, so it's hopefully this isn't particularly complicated, and then all you do here is you hit enter, it'll run, again it'll provide some weird messages, and then once you get this prompt, and sometimes it'll kind of overwrite it, you just hit enter a couple times and you should see it. There's only really 2 commands on the prompt. One is run simulation and the other is quit. Those are the 2 that are important to know at this moment. So you'll type in and hit run simulation. You'll see something here, which is, again, this is just, it's basically preparing the system to run. That's what it's just done. I mean, again, this stuff doesn't really mean much, really. Okay, so now theoretically the simulation is actually run, so we could run quit. And this is like one of those error messages I was mentioning, like when we're quitting, you get some kind of odd stuff there. Okay, so then what we can actually do here is, this is just showing you the log files. And so what we notice is there's this logs directory, so we can change into that. Again, you could use the text editor, and I'll show you how to use Visual Studio Code here in a second to do it. But then you can say, like, there's a logs file. And some of these, like, if you work on some older experiments, you'll notice that the file names have these kind of integers. And then now the newer ones have the date, and then the time that you ran it. Okay, so anyway, so we've got some log files. And so in Unix, if you haven't seen it before, you can type in cat, and that'll just dump the contents of a file. And so what we'll just do is cat, and we'll just dump the log file. And so what you can see is now we've run an auction, in this case a Tentomont, so you can read about how this is actually implemented. And that's it, that's the auction. Similarly, if you want to use Visual Studio Code, you can watch as you develop these things. Yes, I trust the authors. So what you can actually do here is, actually, sorry, I don't know why I've got the wrong one up. But anyway, what you can do is we can flip to, hopefully, the directory that we have it in. And then what we can do is figure out what's going on somewhere. So I think it's here, perhaps. Let's try this. Okay, so then this would be, you're looking through your code here. So trust the authors. And then we go down to, for example, Tentomont. Oh, wait, this is not the right directory. Sorry about that. I have 2 different versions of it. Because why have one when you can confuse yourself? Okay, so then what we're going to do here is we'll look for users. Again, don't follow my example and have multiple directories for things because it will confuse you. And then we're just going to go here, select the folder. Now we'll get Visual Studio Code will reload. And trust the author. And then what we'll notice is this is the log file, and this is what it's going to look like. Similarly, this is what the experiment data file looks like. And so there you go. So that's that. You know, Docker, it kind of can look intimidating, but hopefully this helps to clear some of that up. If you have any questions, obviously feel free to ask them in the channel that's being created for mTree discussions, you know, or anything like that. If you run into weird errors, let us know. As you work through the learning exercises, you might run into some odd issues. So, you know, again, let us know. And then one of the other things, and there'll be an alert on it, is on occasion you'll want to pull the learning examples repo because we will be updating some of the code in that, you know, for other issues that we've encountered ourselves. So, you know, feel free to, you know, if you run into a problem or you're stumped or anything like that, you know, let us know. Don't sit on it by yourself. Okay, that's it for now, and we'll be back later with some additional videos as to how to get started with some other stuff. All right, till then.